promise you that. And I am grateful that I did. And I was sort of guided into this program, had no earthly idea what the future would hold, but by the love and mercy of a power greater than myself, I've been able to stay sober that time, and not only stay sober, but to really find a brand new and vigorous and exciting and rewarding way of life. So I'm grateful for that. That's what I want to share with you about. Yeah, I tell you one thing about that age and the program stuff. If you stay here long enough, it's amazing to watch the wheel turn. And when I came in, I was literally the youngest person in every meeting I attended for several years. And I got so darn tired of people patting on me and oohing and awing and telling me how lucky I was to be an Alcoholics Anonymous. My God, how lucky can you get? You know, I'm just barely starting to live, and I'm already checked into a geriatric ward. Real rough. It is a weird place when you're the youngest cat in town. I'd love to tell you about 50 stories about that, but I'm not going to do it. And then if you stay long enough, the good thing about coming to Florida, my track record gets interrupted here because unfortunately, I believe, well, fortunately for me, but I wind up being the oldest rat in the barn an awful lot. And that's a weird feeling too. But in Florida, I don't have to worry about that. Old is a growth industry in Florida. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to get on with it and tell you as much as I can. I won't tell it all, but I'd love to, but y'all gonna dance here before long or something. So I want to quit by the time you dance anyway. I'm a guy, I'm somebody who believes that you learn what you live. And so I was somebody who grew up, and like most alcoholics I hear talk, just by the experiences I had and the way I reacted to them, I wound up being somebody who found this world and its people and all about it a rather uncomfortable place to live. And so I was just like most people I hear, that felt this kind of distance and separation from people. I was an isolated guy, hid it well, particularly when I was drinking, but I was an isolated guy. I was not somebody that was gregarious, outgoing, and spontaneously responsive to people, or walked up and introduced myself. And so when I was 16, I'd done a little experimental drinking, but when I was 16, I started my first serious drinking. And took to it very well. Drinking came natural for me. I never had to have any lessons. And it was just as normal as anything. My drinking wasn't, but this does not look like a castle. It looks like a prison. Home at last. So I just sort of took to it and took to it very well. Never did like who I was and where I was. And so I coerced my family into, if it's not like I'm hurrying I am, I'm going to try to talk like Yankees. I met more Yankees here than rednecks, that's for sure. But I coerced my mother into the line about my age, so I could go in the military and get out of Dodge, and I did. And went in the military, did extremely well. I started out being picked out as one of the bright young people, leader-type folks in there, gave me an opportunity to go into leadership training and ultimately to become an officer and a leader of men. And then my true shell colors showed, and they changed their mind. And I spent my military career. I was thinking about that. I was out on the balcony looking out at the ocean, a beautiful view. And I was thinking, if it just had a few icebergs and walrus and glaciers and stuff, this would look a lot like where I was in the Aleutian Islands. Wrong. I don't think you can put enough in here to make it. Anyway, that's where I went. And spent 2 years up there. Had a very eventful thing, I'm told, and I didn't know much about it. because I resolved that problem like every other problem I ever had. I tried to drink that sucker to death. And most of the time I didn't know if I was in the Aleutian Islands or Hawaii, and didn't much care, because I do the same thing in either place. And in the course of all that madness, an unfortunate thing happened to a guy who loved drinking as much as I did. I developed alcoholism. And don't understand all this. I mean, I've read a lot more about it than I ever wanted to know. I've read books that do nothing to give me a headache, explaining the etiology of alcoholism and all that kind of stuff. The most profound thing I've ever learned about alcoholism is that I have it. And I don't need to learn a great deal more about it. But we sort of colloquially refer to developing alcoholism as crossing a line from some other kind of drinking into uncontrolled drinking or alcoholism. Best I could tell, that happened to me when I was about 18. I was in I got into Aleutians, and I certainly didn't notice it, because I'm confident that I was drunker than a billy goat tonight. I'll tell you that I went through it, and I wasn't noticing minor little things like crossing lines and stuff like that. But I crossed that line. I certainly didn't notice it. I drank as much as I could before I was alcoholic. Went to jail, lost jobs, lost cars. Yeah, I did all the things that alcoholics do, except one. I could drink or not drink. I elected to drink. And then once I crossed that line, my drinking changed, not in volume or frequency as much, but it changed in the nature, and it became what we call alcoholism. The best definition I have ever heard in my life is one of the simplest lines in our big book in the chapter about alcoholism, where it says a lot of good stuff. One says we have to fully concede to our innermost selves that we've got it before we get anything about getting into recovery. And then the other thing says that we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control their drinking. And I love that definition, because for my money, it goes right to the heart of the matter. When I tell you I'm an alcoholic, I have told you the sum total of my problem. What's wrong with this guy is that I lost the ability to control my drinking. And if I take a drink, that illness turns into a disability. And I go down, and you can predict that I will be destructive to myself and most often to people around me. And it's just the nature of the illness with a guy like me. And so I lost that ability to control. Now, certainly I was not aware of that. I just continued on with what I was doing. They were, I guess, aware of what I was doing in the Army. They didn't see them, but they saw me, I guess. And this bright young fellow who was going to be a leader of men and a gentleman was drummed out of the military. They took me back from ADAC, and that was worth the trip. But they put me in Kansas, and that's the polar opposite of ADAC. And I wound up in Officers Candidate School. Not as a candidate, but as a worker. I was the guy that did the stuff. And that's where I wound up. And finished out a little bit of time, and then it was drummed out. Yeah, it's really telling to me about what happened. I was discharged on the 28th of December, 51. And on December the 27th of 51, I don't recall the physical activity, but I came to on the 28th on the floor of the city jail in Junction City, Kansas. Trashy floor. God knows I can remember that. And I probably didn't help it any either, but there were other folks that didn't help it much either. But I'm laying there proving that they're wrong about thinking I'm not fit for military service. So, don't you know I was a beautiful sight when the military police came and got me the next morning to take me back to declare me unfit, break my sword, and put me in the desert? Beauty, real beauty. They didn't even ask me any questions. When I went before the board for final consideration, there was none. They gave me a piece of paper that said, undesirably discharged, unfit for military service, -alcoholism. And I was 20 years old. 20 years old. You can imagine how much impact that had. Zero. Absolutely zero. this outfit, man, and I'll get out of here and do something with my life, and I did. Whole bunch. Hit the ground, continued the same stuff. But I'm not in a big hurry tonight, but I want to talk about the getting well process. I guess it's caught up now. Don't get me wrong, I love drunk-a-logs. I mean, I flat love them. Some people demonize them. Not me. Not me. I think that's the heart and soul of what we identify with is drunk-a-logs. We don't identify with theology and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. We identify with how we were broken and healed is what we identify. So I love drunk-a-logs, especially mine. I can romance that thing all night. But I'm going to punish myself. And I really just kind of put it into focus in a way that, I mean, it's just a typical surface. I'm not even sure I was typical for an alcoholic. I was totally weird, is what I was. And so I was just a guy crashing through life like a social wrecking ball. I wasn't a criminal. I'd never done a crime in my life with any deliberation. I mean, I've done a lot of things that broke the law. Well, at least society said it broke the law. But I didn't think so. It just seemed to be typical behavior to me. And everybody didn't have the same point of view. And so I got into jail a lot, screwed up a lot of stuff. And if I were going to chart it on the wall somewhere, what my life looked like, on a scale, you'd just be here, down, here, down. And what I failed to recognize every time I hit the wall and crashed and burned, when I got up, I was a notch lower and a notch lower. And I wound up living a kind of life that would have been totally bizarre for me to even imagine winding up. And it's a strange thing to think that part of how I want to frame this thing, that our book uses a couple of descriptive terms for what I'm grappling with here. In Doc's opinion, it talks about the delusion, an inability to differentiate the true from the false, that when we're caught up in it, that the true seems false, and vice versa. And that's one. And the other is illusion. In the chapter about alcoholism, which says, the persistence of the illusion that we'll be able to drink again is astonishing. It just defies all imagination. So I want to just kind of frame it in those things, because that explains to me a lot about why I crashed and burned so visibly. I mean, my God, anybody could have diagnosed that I was a guy spinning out of control. Anybody could have diagnosed I was a guy that was headed for a crash. That was obvious to any observer. Wino could have diagnosed me, man. You didn't need the sheepskin to diagnose me. I was standing in front of you yelling at you, And so I'm just crashing along. And it was just a series of failures and new starts, and failures and new starts. And every time I started over, coming down. And I wound up living the kind of life that I didn't even really know existed. Because I grew up in a rough little